Hi, Miss Safi here. Thank you so much for joining me today for this lesson regarding Julius Caesar. In this lesson, we're going to review some historical context related to the character and the play, the opening of the play, themes that can be found in it, an example and definition for tragic figure, and then we'll look at some of the main characters in the play. So how many words can you think of that are associated with Julius Caesar? You may not realize he has quite an influence on Western history and literature. We get the word July from him, Orange Julius, one of my favorite places, Caesarean section, also commonly known as C-section, Caesar salad, and Little Caesar's pizza. So, Caesar contributed a lot to our society. As you can see, a lot of terminology we use still applies. He was one of the most significant contributors, one of his most significant contributions is the 365-day calendar that we follow today. William Shakespeare wrote the play The Tragedy of Julius Caesar, and it was the first play performed in the Globe Theatre in 1599. The English knew a lot about the Romans back then. They were conquered by Caesar and believed that they were descendants of early Romans. Roman playwrights such as Seneca were popular and admired influences of Elizabethan drama. Shakespeare's audience was also fascinated by Caesar's life and death. So they were kind of going through similarities. They had a dictator becoming corrupt and ignoring the other branches of government, then being assassinated by his own friends. And around that same time in the 1400s in England, the people experienced civil war, and the result was the Tudor family, which is Queen Elizabeth's family line, taking over. So they could relate. Now Shakespeare is accused of plagiarism. So this is debatable though, because even Shakespeare had to do research for his plays. His main source for Julius Caesar was Plutarch, a Greek philosopher who lived around 45 to 130 AD, and some folks claim that what Shakespeare put out is actually plagiarized, and others say no, Plutarch simply inspired him, but the work is unique to Shakespeare. However, Shakespeare did fail to cite his sources in MLA documentation, so maybe it was plagiarism. I'm just kidding, there was no MLA documentation at the time. So, The Tragedy of Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare is set in Rome, 44 BC. It was ruled at the time by a triumvirate, which is a coalition of 3 men. And this triumvirate at the time was Pompey, a great politician and Caesar's son-in-law actually, Caesar himself, the famous general, and then Crassus, who was the wealthiest man in Rome. So these 3 buddies made up the triumvirate. So in 54 BC, Caesar's daughter, Julia, dies, and she was actually married to Pompey. Because she was the only real tie, personal tie at least, between Pompey and Caesar, tensions started to flare between the 2 men. So in 53 BC, Crassus dies, and this ends the first triumvirate and sets Pompey and Caesar against one another. And of course, it's about power. The Senate supported Pompey, and he becomes a sole consul, like a president, in 52 BC. But Caesar, on the other hand, becomes a military hero and a champion of the people. He was the commander in Gaul and had planned on becoming consul when his term in Gaul was up, and at that time terms were only for 1 year. The Senate feared him and wanted him to give up his army, so even though he was not popular with the Senate, Caesar was popular with the people. Caesar writes the Senate a letter in 50 BC and says he will give up his army if Pompey gives up his. This, of course, makes the Senate angry, and they demand that Caesar disband his army at once or be declared an enemy of the people. Legally, however, the Senate really couldn't do that, and Caesar was entitled by law to keep his army until his term was up. So, 2 tribunes, who at this time were Mark Antony and Casius, both were faithful to Caesar, decide to veto the bill and were therefore expelled from the Senate. They flee to Caesar, and the men ask the army for support against the Senate. The army called for action, and on January 19, 49 BC, Caesar crosses the Rubicon into Italy, and civil war has begun. So, crossing the Rubicon is now a metaphor for deliberately proceeding past a point of no return. So, just to sum this up quickly, Caesar chases Pompey all the way to Egypt and defeats him. And while there, Caesar gets a little sidetracked and hangs out with Cleopatra for a while. So, when he returns to Rome, he's now the tribune of the people and a dictator. This is where our play begins. So, when it opens, we see some citizens in support of Caesar and some against him. So February 15th is when this opens, and there's a feast going on, and it's the Feast of Lupercal. So what is that? Well, Lupercus was the fertility god the Romans worshipped. They would sacrifice goats and a dog, and the goats' blood would be smeared on the foreheads of two young men, then wiped off with wool dipped in milk. Then young men wearing only strips of goat skin around their loins ran around the city, striking women with strips of goat skin. It was believed that pregnant women would have an easier labor and infertile women would become fertile. And that was the feast that was going on at the opening of this play. And February actually means to purify, the name of the month that we use in our current calendar. So during this feast, which happens right at the start of our play, some of the conspirators discuss Caesar and what they should do about him having too much power. So the plan to kill him is hatched, and Casius is the brainchild of this plan. So, at this point, what do you think? Would you be worried if someone told you something terrible would happen to you in a month? This is exactly what Caesar was warned, but he didn't really pay much heed to it. He was warned, beware the Ides of March. Julius Caesar is warned to beware the Ides of March by a soothsayer, a fortune teller. And Ides just means the middle of the month, so he was warned that something bad would happen on March 15th, 44 BC. Well, he was in fact killed on March 15th. So let's look at some of the themes that emerge in this play. So you want to keep these in mind because theme is always a question that's asked in the online school questions, whether it's a journal or a test. So keep these in mind and be able to explain them. So some of the themes are misuse of power, corruptive force of power, man's fallibility, the inherent jealousy and selfishness of man. So another really common theme that's often discussed with this play is that power corrupts, that if you have power or the desire for power, it will make you corrupt. So Caesar is a dictator who is suspected of abusing his power. Casius is so power hungry that he assassinates Caesar and brings other people along with him to do so. And then Antony, Octavius, and Lepidus become even worse than Caesar were. And all this is due to power. Some more about themes. Honor is found in loyalty and friendship. So this is definitely seen through the character of Brutus. Corruption found in conspiracy and anarchy. Stability through political order, and viability of republic form of government. So these are also options of themes that you could discuss through this play. All right, you also want to think about mood as you read through this play. There's a lot of influences of mood throughout this play. Watch for overcast skies. Weather is used a lot to create mood. There's an impending doom through the play. Darkness and catastrophe come up often, and there's really no trust left, only manipulation and corruption, which also lends to that mood. And as I said before, the setting is Rome in 44 BC, and these are some of the references that you'll see in the play. Okay, places in ancient Rome. All right, another term you'll want to be familiar with this play is the tragic figure. So a tragic figure or hero is one who has a character flaw which causes them to act poorly or make poor decisions, resulting in their downfall. So it could be that someone loves themselves or power so much that that becomes their tragic flaw. It could be that someone is so forgiving that they forgive everyone, even people they shouldn't, which then becomes their downfall. So it could be different for each person. And you know what? Honestly, I think everybody has some sort of tragic flaw in their personality, but it doesn't lead to a demise like Caesar's, but it's something that we can all explore about our own personalities and see what it is that weakens us as people. Well, as for Julius Caesar, he was an ambitious and ruthless politician. He was a skilled general, and he believed that he was worthy of power more than just being the head of Rome. He wanted to be crowned the leader of the entire Roman Empire, and his ambition actually led to his downfall. That was his tragic flaw. He was a longtime friend to Brutus, and Brutus actually betrayed and stabbed him to stop him from becoming a tyrant due to his ambition. So one could argue that Caesar's tragic flaw was his desire and his ambition for power. So every Shakespearean tragedy has one. However, in Julius Caesar, the tragic hero is not the title character. So the title character is Julius Caesar, but that is not the only person that Shakespeare focuses on. In fact, his tragic hero is actually Brutus. He's a very key figure in this play. So Brutus is a friend of Caesar, and he's an honorable man. His feeling of patriotism towards his country convinces him that Caesar must die rather than become a tyrant. So he really had good intentions, if you could call it that, when it came to the murder of Caesar. Brutus's strong principles led him to allow rival Antony to speak at Caesar's funeral. It was a really bad move on Brutus's part to allow Antony to speak, but because of Brutus's sense of honor, which is really his tragic flaw, he allows him to speak even though it didn't benefit him in the end. Calpurnia, the wife of Caesar, she's actually a very sensible and loving wife to Julius Caesar, had warned her husband not to leave the house during the Ides of March after having a prophetic dream, but unfortunately Caesar didn't listen to her. And then, of course, we have Casius, who is the main conspirator in all of this. He becomes jealous of Caesar's power and fearful that he will abuse that power. He urges Brutus to assassinate both Caesar and Antony. Casius tries to convince Brutus not to allow Antony to speak at Caesar's funeral. And then we have Antony. This scene right here, you could probably find this clip on YouTube, or you can get your hands on this version of the Julius Caesar movie, but it is done beautifully. And this is Antony speaking at the forum once Caesar has been killed, and you can see Caesar here on the floor, but the moving speech that he gives is just amazing. The words in the play themselves that you read are wonderful, and then to see a talented actor deliver that oration is even more inspiring. So Antony was a soldier and Caesar's right-hand man. He was a calculating and persuasive person with his words, and he uses his influence to turn the people of Rome against Brutus. So with Caesar slain, he then seizes the opportunity to take control of Rome. So those are some of the main characters in this play. Now, as you read through the tragedy of Julius Caesar, I want you to think about a few things. Think about conspiracy, think about the word, and think about all the places that you see it appear in the play. Also, think about how Rome fell to mob rule after Caesar's death. Think about places in the world today where once leaders, whether corrupt or not corrupt, fall down. What happens to society? Do mobs start to take over, or is there an ordered way of a new government coming into place? Also think about why history seems to repeat itself over and over again. Caesar is a character from hundreds of years ago, as is Shakespeare, yet the themes and the ideas that are in this play are very relevant today. And then I also want you to think about our own flaws in our personalities and how we can prevent a tragedy in our own lives by our own everyday actions. If we hold a mirror up to ourselves, what tragic flaw can we see that we should be aware of and not be blindsided by? All right, enjoy the play, and I definitely hope to hear from you as you go through it. And just to recap, we went over historical context, the opening setting of this play, themes, tragic figure, and characters. Take care. Thank you.